You on mute, comrade.
Uhuru, my name is Coco Lewis. We try this again. I am the International Secretary of the African National Women's Organization, ANWO, and I'll be your MC for tonight's political education. Tonight's broadcast of African Women Must Lead with Yejide Orunmila is a second in a series of monthly live political education from the African National Women's Organization. Today's topic is African Internationalism, the Liberation Theory for African Women. President Yejide will address feminism, Black feminism, womanism, and patriarchy. Yejide Orunmila sits on the highest body of the African People's Socialist Party, the National Central Committee, as the president of the African National Women's Organization. She has served in this role for the past 7 years. As president, Yejide is responsible for the international growth of ANWO by organizing African women internationally and by creating initiatives that respond to the economic social conditions that remove African women from revolutionary political life. African Women Must Lead is being multi-streamed live on the Burning Spear TV and ANWO on YouTube and ANWO's Facebook page. So if you'd like to know the exact dates for future streams, please follow us and check our website for details at anwohuru.org. So Uhuru, let's welcome our president, President Yejide.
Uhuru, comrades. Happy Juneteenth weekend, right? We ain't free yet, but we're going to recognize this as one of the colonial contradictions that we have to resolve when we get free. Really,
Still ain't free.
Listen, still ain't free. Not yet, Uhuru. But
Right.
Thank you so much, comrade, for that introduction, Uhuru. Uhuru, comrades, I'm just gonna open up. ANWO has written a statement around about the murder of Ajika Owens, an African mom who was woman, who was killed in Florida earlier this month. And we just wanted to share it before we start tonight's broadcast. The African National Women's Organization sends our deepest condolences to the family and friends of Ajika Owens, a 35-year-old African mother who was shot and killed on June 2nd, 2023, when she attempted to defend her children who were violently assaulted by Susan Lawrence, a 58-year-old white woman who was known to the community as a racially hostile aggressor. Ajika's life was stolen like the lives of so many other African people domestically colonized within the borders of the U.S. colony at the hands of a white vigilante and colonial police. African and Native people indigenous to this land have been suffering from the colonial oppression and domination since the U.S. colony was created. The list of Africans we have lost since this violent occupation began continues to grow, and the time for justice is now. Nothing this colonial justice system will bring Ajika back, nor will it stop other Ajikas from dying in the future. Ajike will never get to hold her children, laugh, cry, or feel anything ever again. And as Ajika bled out in the front of Lawrence's door with her baby crying over her body, Lawrence had already developed a defense in accordance with the Florida law of stand your ground. And most of us were introduced to this law in February 2012 when 17-year-old African teenager Trayvon Martin was killed by white vigilante George Zimmerman, who also claimed self-defense after stalking and harassing Trayvon as he walked home after purchasing candy from a store. Zimmerman was ultimately acquitted by a 6-woman jury who accepted self-defense as a justification for murdering Trayvon. However, when Marissa Alexander, an African woman living in Jacksonville, Florida, attempted to use this as a defense when protecting herself from abuse, she was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison, despite not having killed anyone. Clearly, the violence we are experiencing today is the same violence that stripped African people from our homeland to slave for white colonizers as part of their process of colonizing this land, robbing Native indigenous people of their homeland. The same patriotic Americans who so vehemently proclaim allegiance to the colonial US flag are defending their rights to stolen land, the foundation of the Stand Your Ground laws that allows the colonizer to go free while African and other colonized people are trapped by it. It's not meant for us. The slave master makes freedom illegal for the slave. The trail of African bodies is evidence of this. But the problem does not lie with the specific law or with the violent actions of white vigilantes or the colonial police. The problem is that despite the fact that African people in the US have fought to chisel out human rights concessions, we still live under colonial capitalism. We will not find peace or freedom until we destroy the pedestal of power that places white power colonial policy over the lives of the colonized. For us, it's not enough for our lives to matter. We must have power to prevent harm and exact justice if we are harmed. Unfortunately, we do not have that power any place on the planet, but it is possible to build it. We are building it. We must organize and replace the colonial mode of production with a system that ushers in Black power. The time to protect and defend the lives of African and other colonized people is now, or we will keep experiencing this violence. The African National Women's Organization is an international membership based organization for African women formed by the African People's Socialist Party as part of our revolutionary strategy to occupy all spaces of resistance. The party recognizes that African women are especially oppressed under colonialism and that we have an interest in resisting that oppression through organization. How can we expect justice for Ajika under colonialism when organizing for African freedom has been criminalized in the US and anywhere else on the planet? The US's State Department has indicted the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and two other leaders of the Uhuru movement, Jesse Neville, chair of Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and Penny Hess, chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, for promoting this freedom. Chairman Omali Yeshitela has dedicated over 52 years building the Uhuru movement, which boasts African members and supporters all over the globe. He also organized white solidarity with the African Revolution, which calls on white people like chairs Jesse Neville and Penny Hess to organize white people to defend our struggle for self-determination and win reparations for the African community. So there is a stance the colonizer can take to reject their position on the pedestal and to work side by side with African people fighting for liberation. This is the future. To not take that stand, sitting on the sidelines, acting as if Susan Lawrence is a bad apple, is to maintain white people's position on the necks of African and other colonized people. We call on African women in particular to not accept this. You must support your own interests by joining AMWO and getting involved in creating a world where colonialism will no longer exist because you had a hand in destroying it. The time has come that we take control of the means of production so that we can live in a true freedom and prosperity, not for a few of us, but for all of us. At our March 2023 Black Women's Convention, AMWO established a Leadership for Our Safety and Security program. We are building our capacity to defend ourselves as the crisis of imperialism deepens and the level of white vigilantism increases. You can expect future opportunities with the African National Women's Organization to participate in creating safe space and communities, protecting ourselves from harm and training to protect others as well. We want you to sign up for our newsletter at amwouhuru.org to learn about us, the African People's Socialist Party, and our solidarity movement. And once again, we express our deepest sympathies to the family of Ajika Owens. Ajika's death will not be in vain. Long live Ajika Owens. Rest in power, sis. Okay, that was AMWO's statement regarding Ajika Owens' murder at the hands of Susan Lawrence. And we will continue to monitor and also offer any support that we can to the family and anybody else organizing around this issue. So today's political education is entitled African Internationalism, the Liberation Theory for African Women. I'm going to be looking off screen from time to time because I got notes. I want to make sure I am clear. I want to make sure that I am communicating well. And of course, everybody will have an opportunity to ask questions, challenge, and all the things that, I expect from, broadcasting this position online for everybody to see. So I really appreciate Comrade Coco for that introduction. And I just want to, just begin. I do want to make sure that you understand that I'm not going to just jump into it. I'm going to lay the groundwork of African internationalism, which many of you who watch this channel may already know, but really you can't talk about the liberation of African women um, without truly recognizing the historical experiences of African people and how our lives, system, culture was transformed by um, this this earth-shattering transition in human society. And this will mean that we will challenge and why we take on African internationalism as our liberation theory, as opposed to something else like feminism, womanism, and such, which I will also talk about in today's program. It's really important for me to start there, because African people did not come into existence in a bubble. We had conditions that were ripe for successful transition of society. We were developing things for ourselves. We were solving problems related to the things that African people were being confronted with. This is prior to the attack on Africa, prior to the influence of Europe and the total disruption of economic and political life on the continent, that African people were on a trajectory of self-determination, solving problems and all these things, creating things so that we, farming for ourselves, mining for ourselves, educating ourselves, doing these things because we, you know, so that essentially we were going to come together, given time and opportunity, we would come together and recognize this uniform identity as African people. Because some of us were, educators, and some of us were farmers, some of us were nomadic, there were different types of people on the continent of Africa. So that's one of the things that we knew. Another thing that we knew is that Africa was not a homogeneous place. Like, we didn't have a continental identity. And although um, there were many African cultures that were matriarchal, allowing women to hold political seats and fight in battles and own land, I say that. And the rights at that time, in other places in Africa and other places in the world, were not the same as, as some matriarchal lines of people on the African continent. So this all also was just not the same, right? So African women and men experienced differences based on what was needed from within that society. Still, it was African development, right? We were developing according to the needs of that society. At the point at which things shifted, where African people stopped producing for ourselves, was at the point where Europe um, decided that it was colonizing the world, right? Like, it was going out. Europe, of course, is a desperate, dark place. People were dying in mass. Like the chairman says, half the population of Europe had died because of the plague. And, there was a disgusting place, filth everywhere. People were eating their children. I mean, just a horrible place. This was if you think of a zombie movie and you're just trying to get out to find an oasis because everything behind you is like crazy, imagine this place. And that's why people got on those ships, went out into the abyss to find something that was better, that could create a better life for them. And, that was when they landed in Africa and saw Africans and saw all the things that Africans just had at their disposal. And of course, because they um, had been in Europe, really honing their craft of, building weapons of mass destruction, because they were killing themselves as well and torturing each other. When they got to Africa, and African people were just having, interscene struggles, wars, and things like that with, spears and shields. There was no contest when it came down to really fighting, but African people did fight, right? So here we have this point where the European, desperate, starving, and hungry, are now in Africa, and they are looking at all the opportunities, trading and first in goods, and then as they're going out in different places around the world, conquering lands, decimating entire peoples, taking the resources out of those places, they needed to produce the resources to bring back to Europe. So African people now are shifting, are being shifted away from producing for ourselves and now producing for Europe, because Europe now needs labor. Europe now needs those resources. So they're going to have people working in those mines. They're going to force you to do it. They got guns. They have weapons. They have things that can, we hadn't even developed as of yet, because our that wasn't our thing. Like, we wasn't trying to like obliterate people, but Europe had been practiced in obliterating people. So at the time when they met us and cultivated this colonial mode of production that was being used all over the world to take lands and resources, African people then became the labor for that. And so everything that we were doing, even on the African continent, those of us who were not taken, was still about producing, satisfying the needs of white people in order for us not to get taken as well, in order for us to protect ourselves. And then all of those of us who were taken were now laborers who, for hundreds and hundreds of years, um, were producing. Even our own children were taken as as a product, a byproduct of us, for white people. And so I also want to just recognize that in this process, there was no demarcation between, African men, women, and children, that one got treated better than the other. This was all entire decimation of African people, right? So this is the understanding. Like, it was colonialism that caused this contradiction for African people on the onset, right? Colonialism has been used, through this whole entire process, hundreds of years, to continue to produce for the oppressor. And colonialism, then as the foundation of capitalism, parasitic capitalism, because how do you create a worldwide system of that is how do you create this worldwide system of economics? You trade in the bodies of Black people. You take the resources and the things that Black people are producing, and you make money off of it. Then this became the worldwide economic system that we now known as capitalism. So that's when we say that that this is that colonialism is the underpinning of capitalism, right? Like, it's the basis for how capitalism. You would be no capitalism if it were not for colonialism, right? So, and in turn, it would not be, enslaved Africans or the descendants of enslaved Africans if it weren't for colonialism. So our responsibility then is to really recognize how these things played a role in how we are being treated right here and now. Because people think that because there isn't um, this direct, um, visible sort of colonial construct that we have in our head, that somehow it just faded into the Black, like it doesn't exist anymore, right? Like, because African people and people all over the world fought against their colonizers and they got flag independence, people tend to think that colonialism went away. It did not, because we still don't have power. So when you colonialism was used, it was violent, it was used to take power, take self-determination away from the people, away from people who was being colonized. And 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 when, if you, the only way you know that you've defeated that is if you've defeated that, if you actually had to violently overturn that relationship that we have with the people who have colonized us, and we have not done that. In instances we have, like, we had wars fighting for national independence and things like that, but the colonizer just retreated and regrouped and picked his battles and still use what the chairman and talk so much about, which is neo-colonial puppets to administer the same, um, the same policies that it did when it did it directly. So when we talk about African women and liberation, we can't start at a place of male oppressing women, because that's not the starting point. For African women in particular, the starting point for us is recognizing that the deepening of our oppression, the deepening of violence, the ultimate violence that was committed against African people was not that one that we've done to ourselves. It was the one that happened and continues to happen until this day. We just read a statement about Ajika Owens, an African woman who was murdered by this white woman in Florida, and her being able to walk away from that for 5 days without, because the colonial police was trying to find justification for her arrest. I mean, it's completely asinine, and so we have to really look at that. And I also want to say that um we have to recognize colonialism as a violent process, that it changed us, not only our physical condition, but it changed us over time, that hundreds of years of using violence against people would change the way that we respond to things, change the way that we understand life in the world that we live in. And there is a way that can like really shape you. And when somebody colonizes and dominates you, it's not just a process of just violently doing it. It's like you have to take away their culture. You got to educate them. You got to make them love you more than they love themselves. You got to take away their gods. You got to do all of these things to ensure that what you have left is a stripped down version of yourself, and a stripped down version of yourself that you can control and send out when you need to. And so like when we and so and you got to create a world around them that mimics your own, and have them value the same things that you do. That's why there's so many places still where people still call Queen Elizabeth their queen. like what I'm saying, like colonies who still revere this woman who's responsible for your domination and oppression. And so they're teaching you in Africa about Queen Victoria and all of these things that happened in Europe and how great the empire is. Meanwhile, there's nothing that about your homeland, or anything that you recognize or learn in school about, in school or in society and at general, like who you are. And I I just want to make sure that people understand why I'm starting here, is because the women question is wrapped up in all of this. Me as an African woman and knowing the experiences of my foreparents and myself, is wrapped in the colonial question, and in the colonial mode of production, and the colonial reality that we currently live in. So here's one of the times I'm going to go ahead and look at my notes. so so Europe shaped the world, right? Like I said before, they colonized you, they took your culture, our culture, they took our languages, they replaced it with their own. They made us love them more than we love ourselves, because that was advantageous to them. They did that not through persuasion and negotiation, they did that with violence. And so that you knew that if you were to ever resist, that this is the consequences. They made examples of us, and this was the reality. So everything that they erected from that exists today. The schools are not here to make sure that you are a valiant African revolutionary that's fighting for their rights. School is there to tell you all about what's important to the colonizer, and how you can be absorbed into the society, because they want you to be a good Negro. They want you to be the kind of Negro that they can feel happy about putting in place when they no longer are able to do it. So that's neocolonialism, this petty, the petty bourgeoisie. They want you to make sure that you are the broken down version of themselves, and that can control you in that way. And so all of the institutions that are erected, the police, the hospitals, the schools, everything, the prisons, the justice system, all of that stuff is created on the foundation of colonialism. Got it? Okay. Okay. I hope that's clear. So now when we get there, now we are existing, and we know that now there's the oppressor nation versus the oppressed nation, right? So who are the oppressor nations? The oppressor nations obviously is the colonizer, who benefit off the backs of the colonized. Oppressor nation, that's why we say there's no such thing as women in general, because we have to recognize that there's an oppressor nation and an oppressed nation. The oppressor nation resolves contradictions at the expense of the oppressed, and that a good a good example of that is the U.S. Democratic parties, right? The U.S. political parties, Democratic parties, the Republican parties, the Tea Party, even the Green Party. You know what I'm saying? These are colonial institutions that are trying to resolve a problem related to what's happening in their world. And this is just a contest between other segments of the oppressor nation trying to resolve those issues. And then there's the oppressed nation, and the oppressed nation are dealing with contradictions that come as a result of being oppressed, and they're also living in the same society as an oppressor nation, so they're probably exhibiting some of the same things as oppressor nation. There are people who are oppressed within the oppressor nation. That includes women, that includes people who don't identify as heterosexual, that includes a whole segment of, it could be children. There are people, there are contradictions that are happening, and there are oppressions that happen within the oppressor nation. So that's what we see, white women emerging, struggling against, so struggling for equality, struggling to get rights at the turn of the century, trying to become more full in that society. And but they're doing that. They're doing that, having still being on the pedestal of the oppressed nations. For example, 'cause I like to give them, is that here we have a white woman who, in the antebellum South, for example, or some colony somewhere on the continent of Africa, who doesn't have anything to do. She doesn't have her job. Her only job then is to, maintain the house. But she doesn't maintain the house. Who maintains the house for her? Who watches her kids? It's not her. It's the mammy. It's the person that she can control. It's them that's cooking. It's us that's cooking the meals. It's us that's watching her kids. It's us that's taking care of the household, cleaning it up, and she's the one managing it all. So there she is, an oppressed white woman living in the oppressor nation. Now she is given the oppressed to manage and oppress. Does that make that's like a tongue twister? Now she oppressing the oppressed because she's living on the pedestal of that. So everything that she has, even her ability, to just rule the household, is based on the pedestal in which upon which she sits. Now, the oppressed nation, um, obviously, is Africans and other people who have been oppressed by and colonized and subjugated by the colonizers anywhere on the place of the planet, not just in the U.S. but anywhere else where we know that they've reigned. And and so when we experience violence, we get violence double time, right? Like we get violence because if we ever were to push back against the state, we get violence because when you're colonized, there is a heightened sense of violence within the community because you know that the violence from the oppressor can be much worse if you direct it toward them, and so you direct it toward yourself. But because there are deep contradictions that cause tension within the colonized community, that stresses violence, right? Like, and so you are pent up and filled with rage, and the way that you express it could be to kill somebody else just like you, to harm somebody else just like you, to express your power in a way that over people that can take it or will take it and have no other resolve, right? Like, so this is how we express colonized people express power, is by and in some cases by causing harm to others. And so that split, the oppressor nation versus oppressed, helps us as African women understand that there is no such thing as women in general. Like, the oppressor nation women did not experience life just like us. Like, they experienced life as a at our expense. And even the slag, right? Like, I'm using this term, this European slag of a woman who left Europe, who didn't have a penny to her name, and then came to some place like the United States to get a new life. And she did so on stolen land, right? Like, she did get this new life. She did get these new opportunities on the land that was stolen from the native indigenous people here. And now, has things that she has claims to it. So when yeah, so this question of women in general definitely doesn't apply. And we know that there have been attempts to kind of unify this vision, unify, the objectives of women and standing together. But to do so is a total disregard of historical fact that white women in particular always sides with the white men, despite the fact that they are also oppressed people within the oppressed white nation. And then within the oppressed and oppressor nations, there are classes. There are classes. So there are in the oppressor nation, there are the bourgeoisie, there is the working class, there is the poor working class, and there are the poor. In the oppressed nation, um, there is the petty bourgeoisie, there is the oppressed, there's the African working class, and the African poor. And so um, these are all segments of a population that creates division amongst these two nations, right? So it just keeps breaking down. And then, so when we look at things that are developed, like we know that in the colonized nation, we have the African petty bourgeoisie, and we've identified the African petty bourgeoisie as wanting to get what the bourgeoisie has, getting closer to the bourgeoisie. Whatever the bourgeoisie does, whatever the bourgeoisie cares about, the white bourgeoisie cares about, is what the African petty bourgeoisie cares about. They care about the stock market and doing good. They care about all the things that maintains the system of oppression. They care about all of these economic and financial and even security things, protecting the homeland, so to speak, taking on and adopting, this nationalist perspective that is, on the backs of indigenous people here in the US and in other places around the world. So the petty bourgeoisie does as much as it can to align itself with white people, and will fight harder to maintain that system of oppression, and maintain the things that the white people do, because that directly impacts them. So I'm mentioning this in particular because we're about to go into the feminism question, we're about to go into the Black feminist question, we're about to go into all of that in a minute, and and namely because we identify feminism and even Black feminism as the bourgeois, petty bourgeois, um, uh, yeah, a petty bourgeois. I can't find words today. The petty bourgeois, this is what they desire, right? Like, this is a thing, this is their class analysis, this is what they created in order to attain the things that will make their lives better under colonialism. And we say we don't want none of that. African internationalism is a liberation ideology. It is rooted in African revolution. Is about making the revolution, overturning our relationship to the oppressor. And even if you don't happen to be a member of the party, like, this is the guiding principle of the entire Uhuru movement. African internationalism is not something that wants us to have a better life under colonialism. We want to destroy the pedestal upon which all of this establishes itself, because we know that there's going to be another Achika. We know there has been other Trayvons and Marburys, and there's other people, more Malcolms, more, all of this that become susceptible to the onslaught of the colonizer. And colonialism just allows that stuff to happen over and over and over again. So when we look at African internationalism as a liberation theory, it's not enough for African women to live our best life, or what I'm hearing now is a soft life. Like, what I'm saying? We can't do any of that. And with recognition that it's going to be another thing that happens because we haven't destroyed that system yet. And so, for us, that's the principle. That's the main principle. That's what makes us different from all these other theories out there, is that there is no compromise on that. And, everything that we do as the African National Women's Organization is about raising that, exposing these contradictions that cause African women in particular to be isolated and dominated, and use those as an opportunity for African women to empower themselves by coming out of isolation, organizing one another, and drawing correlations with one another. And so that's really important to us in African internationalism, because we have to recognize our ability to that we are capable of overturning the system of oppression. So let's talk about the women now. Like, we want to understand, let's talk about the feminist question, right? Like, so, okay, here we go. Let's talk about the feminists. So, okay. Let me just, I'm gonna open up to y'all, because y'all family, and y'all gonna be watching me. And I'm telling you, when I first came into this question, came into this responsibility of being over the African National Women's Organization, I thought, why do we have to define this women issue, and I didn't really understand feminism then, and I still, to be quite honest, am trying to grapple with all the iterations of feminism now. And even in struggles that we've had with feminists, still not understanding, and still understanding that they also don't have a clear view of what feminism is, how it's liberatory, except when you throw in something else on top of it. And so, in particular, the bourgeois feminism, which is white feminism, obviously we know that that was developed out of the need for white women, in particular, to gain access to the loot that the white men were holding. For example, white women could not own land, white women could not have property, white women could, really, hand down wealth. Everything they got was from their husbands or their fathers. And so, in order to maintain that sort of thing in the U.S. and in the U.S., there was this whole question of voting rights and gaining voting rights for women. And the voting part is about making policies and ensuring that they can now have a legal standing to maintain the things that they want and influence politics so that they can maintain property, at the very least, other sort of things related to resources. So that voting question was not a political one just because they wanted to vote. It was an economic question so that they could make decisions about themselves that took the power out of their economics, back from their husbands and brothers and fathers. So here we have these white women who who came out of the who were also, some of them also were abolitionists, right? So they saw this great struggle that was happening, that started obviously by African people freeing ourselves, escaping to a place that we called safe and communicating our stories. And the white people use this as a political position in order to win over people so far in the South, right, in the states that really wanted slavery. And so white women who were involved in that struggle were also now moving toward, they saw that more and more Africans were coming and that there's the trend toward the abolition of slavery. And so they're now shifting toward voting right and suffragists, right? Like, so white women were now looking at how could they maintain their rights, right? And or maintain or get more rights. So there was a lot of movement around that. And then we saw within the voting rights space, right, for white women at this time, that there was a split. There were women who was just like, I can't support voting rights for niggas, right? They couldn't support voting rights for niggas, right? Like, because they knew that the interests of will be different from their interests. And even the black women that they used to hold up, or to attack abolition were now, they didn't want them to vote either. They actually used them to say, listen, your men are out here trying to get the right to vote. You should try to get the right to vote too, but not because they wanted unity with black women, it's because they wanted to challenge the fact that black men could and did get the right to vote before white women did. So so this question of women's rights is really women's rights back at the turn of the century, the 20th century. I always get them wrong because of 19 and 20, but the 20th century is the basis for white women feminism right now. Like, this is the equality, this is the struggle, this is the economic question, um, uh, an economic question, even maybe even safety question for white women. And so there are waves of feminism that exist, right? And so I think now they're in the fourth wave of feminism, which which I saw started in 2012 and includes intersection and things like that, and still fighting for the rights. And their central focus is on, really attacking patriarchy, male dominance over women, and ending violence, and protecting reproductive rights. And that reproductive rights question is still fishy, right? Like, you want to get reproduction rights, reproductive rights, right? You want to hold that, but you throw African women in the front of that question while not supporting the reproductive day-to-day issues that impact the decisions that African women make around their reproduction. You say you have thousands of women that will go out and wear these pink hats and talk about their vaginas and say you won't control my body, but then will support, more police in the community, will support military, will support all of these things out there that impact our ability to have to reproduce for ourselves, but even attack our freedom. You're attacking the whole reproductive question. And so that's feminism. We understand that white women are oppressor nation women, and they always going to align with their men. Always, if the Trump election wasn't evidence of that, then I don't know what is. If the Susan Lawrence who killed Ajika isn't evidence of that, I don't know what is. We continue to see these ongoing examples, and people tend to make it a joke that these white women behave in this way like it's some funny thing, and it's not. It's indicative of the ongoing system of oppression that white women partake in and are a part of and uphold. And so when we look at the question of bourgeois white women's feminism, we recognize that it's just them trying to resolve struggles between them and white men in their society, and it's just something that is not going to uplift all women. Once they get what they get, they're going to be like, deuces, it was good, seeing y'all, and thank you for pushing on this particular issue, right? So then we have black feminists, right? Like we have black feminists who come into the picture around um 19 in the struggles during the black revolution of the 60s. It's development, it's a trend toward black feminism. And some would argue that it started before then. They used Sojourner Truth to be Sojourner Truth as one of the Sojourner, not Harriet. They used Sojourner as an example. I did a PE on that. They used Sojourner as an example of the early black feminist question when Sojourner was gave her speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" which she would not have said in that vernacular because she was born in New York and she didn't talk like that. But the propagandists at the time thought that that would be dope for for her to have Southern slang and talk broken English when she knew two languages. And so they would use so they would use African women often to get what they wanted, and then of course discard us when it no longer serves them. And so that's no different from today. And I'm sure that there's so many examples that maybe you can point to that I don't even probably know about, but that's just what it is. So when we see black feminism also points to Sojourner as an example of early black feminism. When she gave that talk at the White Women's Convention, it was just called the Women's Convention. It wasn't called the White Women's Convention, but it was a women's convention where she talks about her struggle as a woman and the things that she had to go through. And of course, that also was Sojourner appealing to the sensibilities of white women by telling her story and trying to align herself in a certain kind of way with the struggles that white women were having, and which was to get freedom and equality. But the freedom and equality as Sojourner saw it was not to the same as the white women. It was to get free, to get equality. It wasn't to be equal to this person. It was just to get the hell up out of there. And so like it's really important that we understand that her freedom, Sojourner's freedom, was not the same. It was an anti-colonial freedom. It was an overturning of the system freedom. It's recognition that this white woman that I'm standing in front of right now is also the same woman that bust the head of of her father and her mother. You know what I mean? Like it's the same thing. So black feminists also, so they argue that the black feminist question would have started way before the black revolution of the 1960s, but and they cite Sojourner Truth often, Claudia Jones often around this question. But as again, we talked about the society that we are coming into is not, we don't know anything else. This is all we know. We don't know freedom, what freedom really looks like. We don't know what anything is. All we know is the bubble of colonialism. All we know is how to react and act toward people within colonialism. So the things that I am saying as a result of being only knowing colonialism are a result of colonialism, right? And so it's also pushing out and trying to understand how we can overturn our relationship to colonialism. I see it now, right? Like you take, I forget which pill you're supposed to be taking in Matrix, but you take a pill and then now you know the truth, right? Like, so now you know the truth and now you got to talk about that truth. So Black feminism, as I get back to that point, developed and became strong after within the context of the Black Revolution of the 60s. There was a lot of misogyny that was happening within the Black Power movements, even though Black women made up a large majority of Black revolutionary organizations, namely the Black Panther Party in the United States, and did most of the work. And there's a lot of misogyny that happened, deep and profound misogyny that I've now become aware of, that people were responding to in terms of, you know, why they developed these methods of dealing with that misogyny, and really um, form the conclusion that Black men benefit from patriarchy. So, Black men benefiting from patriarchy is a falsehood. There is no evidence that Black men benefit from patriarchy. Okay, there are contradictions that happen within the African nation. There are contradictions within happen within the oppressor nation, and there is no cross mingling where that white men will just like, all right, Black men, assemble. You know, it's not that. As a matter of fact, it's quite the opposite. It's like, let's lock them up, let's take them down, let's kill them, let's do all these things. So, despite the fact that there was deep misogyny, there were also responding, African men and African women were responding to the conditions that we knew only knew. These are the conditions of violence. These are hundreds of years of violence, hundreds of years of conditioning, hundreds of years of rape, hundreds of years of all these bad things that have happened to African people that were learned freaking behaviors. And these are contradictions that are not antagonistic. We can this if colonialism was we were to destroy it, right? We can resolve all of those things. These are things that does not require violence to solve. We can talk to a brother. We can do all these things. We can resolve all of the contradictions that men and women and women and women and women and children have underneath colonialism in a way that is non-antagonistic. The antagonistic relationship that we have, meaning that the relationship that you have to fight out of, and there is no other way, is a relationship that we have to the oppressor, the relationship that we have to the colonizer. That could, because the way that we became like this was not through negotiation and talk, it was through violence. And that's the point where the two meet and cannot at all live together anymore. It will be, we would need that violence again. So Black feminism then takes the conditions that we were forced to live under and now says that it puts it on Black men, right? They also recognize all the things that I just said. Some of the things that I've just said in terms of colonialism, slavery, things like that, not being the same as white women because white women are the oppressor. All of these things, but there is no liberation. There's no end to that. It's just I'm just a feminist and I want equality. I don't want violence. I don't want this. I don't want that. Unless you throw something else on top of the feminism, which could be a radical Black feminism. It could be a something else a hood feminist. It could be all of these things that further define the feminism that you're talking about. We don't need any of that stuff. We African internationalists, and that for me says it all. That we are African people who desire freedom and will not stop until we get that. And African women recognize that our freedom is wrapped up in the ability for Black people getting free. And if we want Black people to get free, we have to be working hand in hand to get that freedom for Black people. It will not happen outside of that. In that process of getting freedom for Black people, we are going to have to deal with those contradictions that happen internally that sometimes prevent us from getting up and out and doing all the things. But again, those things are non-antagonistic. They can be resolved through communication and coercion and things like that. And sometimes coercion might mean a little knock to the head, little kick to the butt, something like that. But it doesn't have to end in the way that it would have to end with the colonizer. Okay, so that's Black feminism, and it's a petty bourgeois ideology, right? Like it's really rooted it's really taught in in higher education institutions. Like, you don't learn how to be a Black feminist from being in the hood. Like, you don't learn these terminologies. It's really a petty bourgeois ideology that supports the fact that you're trying to change the system and trying to get gains and get the things that white women get, and align yourself with that position, because it doesn't destroy the colonial mode of production. It inherits it, and then you are trying to change it from that standpoint. That's how I understand it, because I don't, and trust and believe, I've been looking at feminism for over 8 years, 10 years, and recognize that there is nothing about it that appeals to the African working class, despite the fact that the African working class woman can be used at various intervals to make a point for Black feminists, when in fact it isn't rooted in the African working class at all. And then there's womanism. And people often, I'm talking on all these issues because people always ask me, okay, if we don't unite with Black feminism, then they talk about womanism, right? So I had to really, I really appreciate Latiera Pfeifers, who is a womanist and somebody that we attempted to organize to us. But she is a womanist, and she had shared a document with me called the Womanist Reader. And in this reader, they describe womanism and their method to social transformation. I'm going to read it verbatim, and you can decide for yourself. You can understand for yourself why this is not something that we can identify with as African internationalism, right? So their method of social transformation, womanist methods of social transformation cohere around the activities of harmonizing and coordinating, balancing, and healing. These methods work in and through relationship, reject violence and aggression, but not assertiveness, and readily incorporate everyday activities. It says in this document, it is in contrast to established ideologies. Actually, womanism rejects ideology altogether. They consider it dogma. They consider it control, and that there is nothing that can be gained emotionally or what do they call it, spiritually, from really understanding the world. So in contrast, they name that that established ideological perspectives like they even reject the ideology of feminism, ethnic nationalism, or culture nationalism, or Black nationalism, Marxism, socialism, and so on. Womanist activism does not focus on the confrontation of institutional structures so much as on the shaping of thought processes and relationships. I wanted to say that that all sounds beautiful. I am not in opposition to womanism, right? I think, I mean, as a personal mantra, this sounds beautiful. It's flowery, right? Like, I really hope that we can resolve those things in a free world. We are not in a free world. There's no way that Black women who consider themselves centering the Black family, centering Black womanhood, um, it's petty bull. Like, it's really like, it is that soft life. It is not considering that there are women who you cannot go to with this thing, who need social transformation that is more daring than this, who need something beyond just words and responses to spiritualism and negotiation, but actually need power, and it must confront the social things that are inhibiting them from getting that power. And so, in a free world, be a womanist. We not in a free world. In a free world, this is lovely, but we not in that free world. And so that's why the African National Women's Organizing does not, subscribe to womanism. We subscribe to African internationalism. And so, in general, African internationalism, in short, um, African internationalism, one, is rooted in dialectical materialist observations of historical experiences, which explains the conditions of all African women. And when we say dialectical materialist, meaning that we look at the world, we look at history, we look at the current conditions, we look at what's happening around us and draw conclusions. And if we do that, there's no way that we can take on a womanist perspective. There's no way that we can even take on a feminist perspective, which for all intents and purposes can be anything that you want. And there's no way that we can do that. And if we ever want to transform the world, we have to take on an ideology that says, I need to change the world, and practice that ideology toward changing the world. And if that means organizing, lifting up, empowering other African women who are African working class in particular. Like, I'm not interested in empowering Condoleezza Rice or Michelle Obama or any of those people. I'm not interested in doing that because they're the African petty bourgeoisie. They don't, these are the things that they concerned about. I'm interested in empowering LaQuisha. I'm interested in empowering Mashe. I'm interested in empowering myself as an African working class woman. I'm empowering my daughter. I'm empowering every poor working class African woman who has been isolated and destroyed by the system. This is the people who don't have a voice. And as a matter of fact, I talked to one of the sisters that came to the Black Mothers March, who told me that she had an idea. She working class to the bone, y'all. And she said she had an idea. She wanted to use her voice because she'd been in jail. She'd been sexually molested. And by the way, we need to have a PE on sexual molestation and how many women we have come across who experienced trauma because of the sexual molestation, rape, violence, and all of that stuff, which is very freaking real, and shapes the womanist, shapes the feminist, as opposed to really understanding, the conditions, right? Like, and how we can combat that. Anyway, but I met her. She said she had an idea that African petty bourgeois women told her that she can't do that. You ain't got no education, in so many words. So there are things that we are experiencing, and African working class women are not being put forward because people don't have confidence in them, and they in turn don't have confidence in themselves. And we experience that every day in our work. Number two, African internationalism is an African working class theory that validates the experiences of African poor and working class women as a result of the colonial conditions we are confronted by. So we don't care if you own crack. We don't care if you just beat your children. And I'm saying this with all the love and respect. We will help you not beat your child. We will help you get off the crack. Like, we don't care. These are contradictions, again, that can be resolved through negotiation and coordination and a lot of support. You know what I mean? These are things that can be resolved. And we do not validate in any way, shape, or form the methods of the oppressor to criminalize, isolate, detach African women who they've made into these things from themselves. So we validate the experiences of African poor and working class African women, period. Number three, African internationalism empowers African women to confront colonial conditions as a way of relieving the isolation caused by colonialism. I don't know if I need to deepen that, but like, you don't even know, like, so I said it before, and I'm gonna say it again. I'm gonna say it again after this. African women is likely are more than half of the African nation. Let's look at how many African women are in isolation because of the contradictions they are experiencing because of colonialism. We could talk about all the girls that are forced into sex work, all the women that are trafficked, all of the people who have the weight and burden of the family on their shoulders, all the people who work low wages, and all of the things, who experience trauma, sexual and otherwise, and that removes us from the main, from it. So when we dig down into those things, those are really tough things. They are things that are heavy, right? Like, if you're organizing in that space. But if you can get that woman that's experiencing that to say, yeah, petty bourgeois, son. Yeah, the neo-colonialist, yes, son. Because then we start to have them understand what's happening to them. We're going to try to solve the problem too. But like, we also try to get them to understand, like, they start to understand, like, yeah, man, it's not the fact that I'm this or that. It's because the system, and recognizing now, like, this is how we challenge that thing. And you should see the backs of women stand up, right? Like, you can see the backs of women become straighter because now we've given them the confidence, or they've gained the confidence themselves. We don't give them anything. we we are an organization that works with African women despite their class contradictions, right? Like, and you can be the African petty bourgeoisie and be in the African National Women's Organization, but you got to you got to have a class analysis that aligns with the African working class and poor. So really, we empower African women to confront colonial conditions as a way of relieving the isolation caused by colonialism. So there have been African women who said, "Ooh," who come into organization who's like, I can't do that because um, I work for the state, or things like that. Like African women who are being challenged by the state need you to go into the state and do some shit. You know what I'm saying? Need you to go in there and finagle some things so that you can relieve this contradiction that is happening to African women. So you can't say you won't do something because you might be seen by your boss or your manager. And I recognize that jobs is real. You want trying to keep that stuff, but there also is a place for you to make a decision about where your interest lies. If your interest lies in maintaining just yourself and maintaining the luxury or the comfort or the soft life that you desire, then this ain't the place for you, and you really ain't looking for the African Revolution. That's the reality of it. And the African Revolution for us is really rooted in the African working class woman and validating her and confronting those systems that isolate her. Okay, that was number 3. I'm trying to get them. Number 4, African internationalism urges relationships with African women across borders, identities, and abilities. Whatever you is, sis, you are welcomed in African internationalism. It is your liberation ideology. Like, there is no, if you are an African person on the face of the planet, you are welcome in African internationalism, point blank, period. And you can use African internationalism to explain what it is that is happening to you, because why? It's a dialectical materialist theory that forces us to look at the world, what is happening to us historically and what is happening to us now, and draw a conclusion based on the initial and the foundational roots of African internationalism, which is that Africa was attacked. And because Africa was attacked, African people were stolen, African resources were stolen. This is where we are today, because none of that stuff is back in our hands. We do not own the colonial mode. We don't want to own the colonial mode of production, but we do not own the mode of production that produces for the world. Because if we did, our lives would be much better. 5, final thing. African internationalism draws us to a final conclusion by helping us understand what freedom is and how we can obtain it. So, as I said before, I'm not clear on what freedom is for the feminists. It could be making it into office. It could be stopping genital mutilation somewhere on the planet. It could mean equality. I'm not clear on what equality means under colonialism. How do you be equal to the oppressor? I don't, well, you can be equal to the oppressor by behaving like the oppressor, but equality for me, I can only envision this because it doesn't exist anywhere on the face of the planet, is a world where we destroy colonialism and then we find out. Freedom to me is a world where we destroy colonialism, then we find out. We have the freedom then to create the reality that exists without the stain of colonialism pressing on us, that we have now an opportunity to get at the resources, control the means of production of those resources, and build roads, make electricity, make these fantastic, beautiful cities, use technology in our own benefit, ensure that African women and children are safe. We will have the ability to do that. We do not have that now. And in turn, making sure that African women are safe, because we're talking about Africa, other lands belong to other people. But like for Africa, we know it's going to be safe. For African people in other places around the world, we're going to be safe because now we have one united socialist Africa, because that's what our liberation theory is built around, is socialism. And those resources that are being used for everybody else the world over. Do you know that there is a dam somewhere in Africa, I think it's in Congo, that powers someplace in Europe? Do you know that they had an article a couple of years ago about stealing the sun out of Africa and using it, solar power, to power someplace in Europe? Do you know that the resources that get out of the ground in Africa, that they've destroyed entire ecosystems around, those resources are not are not manufactured in Africa. They're manufactured somewhere else. So freedom means owning the means of production so that we can use all of these things for ourselves and in turn create a better society for ourselves and others around the world, because now African people will have a better position to be in. So that is African internationalism. This is why African liberation theory has to be entrenched in African internationalism. Why we can't subscribe, why we don't subscribe, we reject actually feminism and African what do you call it, Black feminism, and while womanism is beautiful, while we can't subscribe to that either, because as revolutionaries. So we're gonna open it up for question and answer, but I'm going to let my comrade Coco come back on and tell you a little bit about some stuff. Uhuru, Uhuru, comrade.
Very powerful, very powerful, and this insightful. That was amazing study. So thank you, President Yejide. So for everyone watching, we're on our way to the Q&A section. So please prepare your question. Put them in. If you have questions, I've seen a couple come in there. We're on YouTube underneath that Burning Spear channel, and also under Anwell's channel. Again, we're on Facebook Live at this time, and we have moderators in both. So definitely put your questions. I've seen a couple come in there, and we're gonna, address those momentarily. But before we go ahead and go into the announcements, go into the Q&A, we have some announcements here. Let me go ahead and bring these up. So our first announcement is if you like what we've put down, if you like what we put down today, what President Yejide put forward, and want to know more and want to get involved and want to get into revolutionary political life, join AMWO. As President Yejide said, all women, no matter what your contradictions are, should be a part of AMWO. And so AMWO is the only anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, revolutionary organization for Black women. We have members in Africa, Europe, and in the United States. You can join the International Collective of Women Building the Revolutionary Capacity of African Women. So to learn more about membership and to join us, go to ANWO, that's ANWO, Uhuru, that's UHURU.org/join. And then also, as a international organization, the African National Women's Organization needs your help to establish our first headquarters location. We have the building, but we need your help to reach our $50,000 goal. And this would be to restore and set this location up to service the community. Our goal for this webinar is $500. You can make your contribution by going to anwouhuru.org/donate, or you can use your phone to scan the donation code for Cash App using your, or if you can go to Cash App is $anwouhuru. So looking out for that $500. Whoever got it, give it, because we're gonna get this headquarters built, and we put in our sweat equity, and we can use your help as well. Another way to support AMWO is to support AMWO's economic development project, and that is Decolonize Hair and Body. Decolonize Hair and Body is a natural personal care product line that highlights the natural ingredients and traditional care practices used by Indigenous people all around the world. Get your items today. You can also use your you can also join Decolonize team, so you can join our marketing team as well as purchase from the website. Hands off Uhuru, Hands off Africa. So President Yejide mentioned this in her article that, we wanted to support the Uhuru Three in our fight against the U.S. indictments. So defend the African freedom struggle, defend the African liberation struggle, defend the Uhuru moment. You can get more information and donate by going to handsoffuhuru.org. And we're looking for volunteers for this, for our web shows specifically. So you can volunteer with ANWO. ANWO is looking for producers. That's our big one. So if you have that experience or have that interest in producing web shows, definitely reach out to us. So we need producers, interpreters. Again, we're an international movement, an international organization, and we have members that speak several languages, different native languages. We also can use chat moderators and advocates for ANWO and the political education series. You can email us at info@anwouhuru.org if you'd like to share your skills. And our last announcement, which is a big announcement, is coming this month, 2023, June 2023. The verdict is in, reparations now. And this is celebrating the 40th edition of the report from the 1982 World Tribunal on Reparations to African People by the chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, ahead of the African Internationalist Movement, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. So pre-ordered now at the Burning Spear store, Burning Spear, the Burning Spear .store. I'm sorry, a little tongue-tied there. So with announcements out of the way, let's go ahead and bring President Yejide back on, and we can get into the comments and questions here.
All right. I hope I did a good job that I don't need to answer no questions, then I'm going to talk my non-collar and be like, done. I'm cool here right now, right? Like, I did see one though. I was trying to find it again. It was from Comrade Seyero, who asked about the dual and contending power. Yeah, I'm gonna highlight that. Here we go. Can you define dual and contending power, please? Yes. So hopefully I do this as quickly as possible because I tend to overtalk. I've learned from the chairman. Like I've learned how to express myself in many, many words. Chairman is great at that. But good because you try to give people an understanding beyond just a simple quick answer. So here's my answer. Dual and contending power is basically building institutions, organizations, things that contend with the colonial power structure, like so that we don't have to rely on those things. For example, the African National Women's Organization says that we don't like DHS, not because they're not cute, but because they still kids, and we know that kids need help. So what do we do in relation to that to solve that problem and to help African women? We create the Uhuru Kijiji Child Care Collective that says that we are going to be the community response to that. The same thing as Black community control of the police, where we determine how to keep each other safe. We control how the police operate in our community, and building power in those alternatives to the current, colonial state is how we build dual and contending power. So you build enough power, then you're able to contend with the thing that the state is doing. So I hope that was good. Okay, I see it. Can you address the criticism that Black women have become too educated for Black men? How should I address this criticism? I don't think that's.
That's my question, by the way.
Oh, okay.
No, because that I feel like that's something that's held against us is another symptom of oppression, of our oppression. Being oppressed class is that, they utilize us to, that criticism to separate the Black community. They separate the Black man from the Black women. So, and what, to me, what African internationalism is saying is like, all of our skills is used to liberate each other, no matter where they come from. As long as we are first, chairman, one of the first things we talked about when I first met him many years ago is that as a college student, my responsibility was to use my skills that I was attaining in college for the movement. And so that's, so as long, to me, once you have grappled and struggled with yourself, with the petty bourgeois influence that you have going into higher education, is that no matter if I'm just a person on the team of African internationalism, of the movement. It's not about me as an individual or me as a woman with the skills that I have. My skills go into, I can never be better than the person than my comrade. We putting it in the same amount of work.
I wonder who made that criticism, though. I mean, I wonder who's making that criticism around education, number one. Number two, about, and comparing it, drawing it toward African men. And I'm very skeptical about questions like that, because it's coming from a place of division, and that somebody wants to sow. I mean, who brings this up? You know what I'm saying? Who brings up the question of African women becoming too educated for African men? I think what we're talking about here, comrades, is freedom, pure and simple. And if we involve ourselves in like these, what seems to be like a petty bourgeois discussion, we have to go in there as revolutionaries, and not deepen this division, but to allow the African working class to shine in terms of what y'all talking about. What is this question about? Like can we get free, y'all? Because this question, in my view, this criticism, in my view, doesn't get us to where we need to be as African people, which is free. It is something that is about, it's something that's about like really this divisional thing that we ain't got time for. Who cares if African women are more educated than men? If that's the case, who cares if African men are more educated than African women? Who gives a crap? But neither one of us is free, comrades. neither one of us neither one of us got freedom or owns the means of production to do anything more with that education than support the lives of white people. But I mean, really, so I appreciate jobs, okay. I mean, that's in colonial society, we celebrate these wins and these losses based on what it can help us attain and how close we can get to the white power system. And we don't think about, that's why I really love APDEP too, because it's causing African people who have these skills to come back to the African Revolution, contribute your skills to these things. So if you have education, if you have a skill that would normally go to the colonizers, we tell you to bring those skills back to the African community and help solve problems with those skills that allow us to get one step further toward freedom. So I don't care if somebody's smarter than me or not. Like, let's use, if you're not using that skill or that education to further the African Revolution, then there's not even a discussion that needs to be had unless we're talking about how those skills can be used. So I appreciate that, comrade. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? I'm not seeing any. I want to appreciate comrades forces who are also donating. I see Chess Henry donated $10. Really appreciate that. We still need to raise those resources. I saw earlier a donation. I forget who, but let me see if I can. Okay, Brooke Bennett gave $5. Thank you so much, Brooke. Really appreciate that. Yes. Yes. Aha. Thank you so much, Brooke. I love this thing. You can pop things up on the screen. Any other questions for me? Okay. You want to see some of these comments?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
It's like, okay, I appreciate this one. From Black No Cop Zone. It seems that the principles of Black feminism are transmitted directly to young African working class through media structures of colonial capitalism itself. Terms like boss bitch and trap queen.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree. Bougie, black and bougie. What's the word? Black magic.
right.
But
Excellent.
black girl magic, not just black magic, black girl magic. All these things. It is it is a self satisfying, narcissistic, um, bourgeois, petty sort of centralization of oneself that doesn't is not rooted in liberation. And I know that there is a verve of people who believe liberation is really tied to our connection to, have the ability to do all the other things that people in the world do. But if that's all that it is though, like it's a culture out there now that's just that. And as you know, when people talk about black girl magic, they're not talking about Asada Shakur. Like, you know what I mean? They're not talking about Harriet Tubman. They're not talking about like black women revolutionaries. They talk about the black petty bourgeoisie that they aspire to be. And the same thing like boss bitch and trap queen. These are things that I don't know if feminists use trap queen, but if you say so, Conrad, but like I feel like that even is a working class distinction right there with the trap queen, because that says that you got to do what you got to do in order to survive in the hood based on the contradictions of colonialism. But I agree with like the boss bitch characterization that kind of gives off an air of elitism and self um, self centralization that I think um, definitely entrenches African women into this idea that that equality terms refer to. Appreciate that. Um, okay. Well, I don't know. I'll just rattle on until I think I do a good job. So let me just rattle on some more, and until we to roll out. But is there any other questions, Comrade? Do you have any other questions?
No, I don't have any questions. I just brought that up because something I came into contact with this week.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that preparing for this, I really wanted to make sure that everybody, I know it was long winded, like, it's an hour and 30 minutes that we have for this show, but I think it's really important that we talk about like all of the historical things that contribute to the experiences of Black people, period. Not just in the US, but everywhere. Like what happened to Africa and African people is not just a US experience, the colony of US. It's settler colonialism, it's domestic colonialism, it's neocolonialism, and these things are represented in different places around the world. Even the Black faces that you see in power in Africa and the Caribbean, neocolonialism. Because if I was in power somewhere, let me tell you what I do. Let me tell you what a revolutionary would do. I would,
Do that,
burn all the
what
money
they
with the white people on it, right? Number one, like you know what I'm saying, like turn over the resources to improve the conditions of our people. But these people don't do that stuff.
right. And but we also see what happens when you go against that, and it takes organization bigger than just that country, that person,
It requires a
it
social
takes
movement. It
support.
requires organization. These things do not happen at the drop of a dime. And we've seen in places where there's like social movement and it's populist movements, right? And for example, I'm always struck by people's, well, for example, like I forget which country in East Africa it was, but maybe it was Ethiopia, and they was all in the streets because they wanted to get rid of this leader or that leader, right? And it was like they've been in power for 500 years. We need to get them out. And so somebody was presented to them that was acceptable, and they allow this person to come in. They don't even know what this person stands for. They didn't move this person. It was this person. You don't know anything about it. It's just different from what was they're used to. And what we have to do as African people is shift. We have to create the culture under which these people, these leaders, come to existence, and we are doing that with the No Hua movement. And I'm really confident that we will have a competent leader that's leading us out and organizing in different places around the world for African freedom, and have a revolutionary ideology like African internationalism that helps lead us out of there. So, I'm really confident that will happen. And I think, that will be a woman. Shoot, to be quite honest with you, I think it has to be. You know what I'm saying? It has to be a woman in
Mm.
all these places. Because these are these, if we're talking about the specifically oppressed and in dealing with these issues that African people are confronted by, and knowing that African women, even in this organization, are a majority in the NCC and in the race of the party too, then it's gonna, like, there's no way. We have to recognize the ascendancy of the African woman in leading out on these questions for the African Revolution and for the transformation of society. So definitely, definitely.
We got a question from Chess and on Facebook.
Okay.
Chess Henry.
Hmm.
My name is Chess, and I'm from Portland, Oregon. Are there any books I can read and recommend that are especially focused on African internationalism, feminism, African women? I will share this talk far and wide. Thank you so much for bringing me here. Uhuru, love and power to you, President Yejide.
Thank you so much, Chess. I wish there was a book that could wrap all of that up. We
Yeah,
haven't
right.
we haven't written it yet. We haven't written it yet. But when it gets out there, because everything that I refer to in today's talk is just reading books around to stuff and subjects. Is reading bell hooks, is reading Octavia Butler, is reading Claudia Jones, is reading the chairman, all the books of the chairman, is reading Walter
Yeah,
Rodney and Sheikh Anta Diop and uh, France Fanon. All of these things are amazing references of points around in history of thought that we can use, because I didn't live back then. So you look at these books and you like, okay, I'm wrapping this up. This is we're on trajectory, right? This is good. And so what we could possibly do on the ANWO website is like even provide a reading list of books that I and other comrades have read that we thought was helpful in developing, revolutionary thoughts, and also that you can really see African internationalism in, even if they stop short of African internationalism, you can still see development of African people and how the chairman took all of these things and wrapped it up in African internationalism and further the political theory to a point of conclusion, right? Um, so action item, we will add we will
yeah.
add this list to the site.
I mean, but also, we have Harriet's Daughter book clubs for
Yes.
local chapters. So, if you are interested into, uh, learning and studying more, definitely, sign up with us, with the membership and join, a local chapter. We have those Harriet Daughters book clubs, but also having a resource for people that are not that cannot be members of AMWO, but can be supporters, having that information available. Because I know when Africa One Nation by Chairman Omali Yeshitela changed my life. It would be a totally different person here if it wasn't for that book.
I want to do
right
this.
there.
I agree with that suggestion in terms of the Harriet, because we haven't had a book club in a minute, and they were really amazing, especially when we were doing them in person. So I'm gonna do this. We have members and active organizers in the following states: Washington, D.C., Cleveland, Ohio, St. Louis, Missouri, St. Petersburg, Florida, San Diego, California, Los Angeles, California.
Los Angeles.
And I'm forgetting some I know
DC.
that say again.
I said DC.
I said DC, Maryland. And if folks are interested in wanting to be a part of a book study in those areas, whether you're watching it live, whether you're watching it afterwards, get with us, and we happy to open it up to
Yeah.
you. I see the one last question that we can take, and then we have to close out the talk. Chicago, Uhuru Comrade, yes. Okay.
Yes.
Brooke Bennett said, "What inspired you to join African Internationalism movement? Was there a defining moment?" Yes. So here's my story, Brooke. Try to do it real fast. I I actually came to an African Liberation Day event the party was holding in Washington D.C. I had just moved down from New York to D.C. and I was like, when I go down to D.C., I'm about to be at the African Liberation Day event because I was like, "Ooh, we're gonna do this." And at that point in my life, I had a women's group on Ning. Some of y'all might know what Ning is. We were talking about women's stuff. I was, it had been a place where we talked about spirituality, food, health, all of these things. But there was a point in those discussions where I was like, let's institute some practical programs. And the women in this group was just like, nah. And I was just like, oh, okay, this is my group. Mind you, this is the group that me and this other sister created, and they was just like, nah. And I was just like, oh, so I can't do much else with this group. So when I went to ALD and I saw the practical programs of the African People's Socialist Party, all the organizations that they had on the ground, and ways that I can insert myself in that, and the African Internationalist theory brought it all together for me because I was also thinking about the IMF, World Bank. That was my wheelhouse, talking about the economic sanctions and all the economic depravity that the United States imperialist stuff was doing to the Caribbean in particular, and how they would also do it to other African nations. And so that was my wheelhouse. So when I heard African internationalism, I was just like, oh, okay, okay, this makes sense. This makes sense because there's only so far you can go. And what makes sense is that the historical basis, the understanding, the connection to it all. And you really just have to study African internationalism. It took me a while to grapple the whole entire things, but just the basics of it is really, Africa was attacked, resources and people were stolen, colonialism still exists. And because colonialism still exists, we ain't free. If African people destroy colonialism, we get free. Uh, basics, and I want to be a part of that. I want to see that freedom in my lifetime. So, comrades, thank you so much. We really appreciate you for joining us this evening. And we look forward to seeing you at another African Women Must Lead with
Yes.
me next month. I don't know the date right now, but you can always go to our website, nwouhuru.org, to find all of our African Women Must Leads and the breakdown web show that we also do with guests. So thank you so much.
I know the date is July
There
21st.
you go. That's my cocoa is on. And July 21st. And then I think the breakdown is at the beginning of July.
Correct.
So yeah, y'all, we holler at you, and definitely subscribe to the Bernitia channel if you don't. Subscribe to the Anwa Uhuru channel on Facebook and follow us
Like,
on all the
subscribe,
and,
share this
share this
video with
video and subscribe to us on all the places. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. No, we're not on TikTok. What's the other one? Twitter.
Twitch.
Twitter. We're not on Twitch yet either. Okay, y'all. Thank you so
Oh,
much. Have a good night.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.